Listen. This year's South by was finally back in person after being the first big fest to cancel back in 2020, and in my opinion, they went all out. They pulled up with the Batmobile, they had all the bat suits racked up out there, they even had bat bridges, the boys were giving out Vot burgers, LimeWire somehow made a comeback, and they even 3D printed an entire house. But while South by is a music fest, it's a comedy fest, they got keynotes, VR, all these sessions rolled into one, our main thing is always the movies. We were able to catch 70-something complete feature films and 40-something shorts, which we covered all in long form over on the Nika podcast as soon as the festival was over. But over here, I kind of want to break it down into 5 categories and hopefully put a new must-watch on your radar, beginning with the comedies. So let me explain. So in my opinion, this would be the biggest genre out of South by, and they really pushed on the hyphens this year. In terms of comedy surrealism, they had the Atlanta Season 3 premiere as their closing night film, and they even had a pop-up experience that was kind of interesting and definitely was an experience. Marshall the Shell with Shoes On went from being a stop-motion YouTube short about a shell venting its daily life to a feature-length comedy family film brought to you by A24. Spin Me Round was a rom-com that follows Allison Brie as an off-branch Olive Garden manager who goes to Italy, gets into chaos, and then rides scooters around the plaza with Aubrey. Except for the fact that there was no scooter in this movie. The Lost City was the big comedy adventure that had Channing showing his Tatums and Sandy steering his Bullocks.
Hey, whoa, she doesn't need saving in there.
Okay.
What are you doing in there?
And they kept them going. There was Sell By Date that is considered an unorthodox comedy about a playwright playing herself within different personalities in order to document sex work through different interviews, with the most surprising one coming from Bryan Cranston that actually changes the entire perspective of the doc.
Hopefully help them forget they're even watching one person. I even had one friend say, "Who played the guy?" I was like, how good is our friendship if you don't know that was me?
There's the dramedy of Pretty Problems that sees a struggling couple go on a getaway with rich folks who may be getting away with using them as entertainment. Kids in the Hall, Comedy Punks was the comedy doc that was actually kind of depressing when you realize where a lot of these jokes stem from, but I thought it was an interesting look back at the troupe and also leads to the renewal of their show. Pirates was a comedy and chill movie that follows 3 friends on New Year's Eve in 1999 trying to make it to the party of the century while driving through London, turning I Want It That Way into an apology, and literally just stopping the movie to vibe to some songs in their car. The prank pitched itself as a hybrid genre that follows an Evan Hansen-looking kid seeking revenge on his sinister teacher, played by Rita Moreno, because she won't give him the grade that he wants. It's just a comedy thriller. The Locust is a comedy drama that's a movie within a movie about a crew rehearsing a script for a movie. Then there's Cheese, the comedy crime thriller that I really liked. It's actually set up to be a first in a trilogy, and it comes from director Damien Marcano, who's worked on some great TV shows and takes his feature back to his hometown as we follow Skimma, who's actually trying to leave the island. His one way out ends up being him dealing pot, which he then hides in the cheese that he's made at the shop that he's working at.
Thing man calling cheese weed. People them saying it opening your third eye.
I can't wait to see how they wrap it all up. There was also a duo of horror comedies that dealt with online influencers. Deadstream comes from directors Vanessa and Joseph Winter, who met while hanging wallpaper for a student film, and now they've got themselves a pretty solid South by flick. It stars Joseph as his disgraced online personality who decides to live stream his stay at a haunted house, only for him to go from being demonetized to being demonized. It's under 90 minutes, has some pretty good practical effects, and is loaded with a bunch of little things to pause and catch once it's released on Shudder. Sissy would be the other horror comedy that follows a mental health social media influencer who runs into her ex-BFF, who invites her to her bachelorette party, only to run into the other woman who stole her best friend from her. And then I'd just like to add The Cellar, because it's a horror that won't really make you shudder unless you're kind of scared about horror math, but I think it will make you laugh. Just watch the short that it's based on because it's on YouTube.
Steven. Mom. Steven.
But out of all of those, these right here would be my top 6 recommendations. There's the space comedy Linoleum that really gets into the sci-fi elements when a satellite falls into a suburban home in Ohio, and Jim Gaffigan's character decides to chase his dream of becoming the ultimate Bill Nye and go up into space. The ending had me rethinking the entire movie, but really, it's one of those where at its core, it's a movie about this dysfunctional family that the director dedicated to his grandparents, and honestly, I can't wait to rewatch this one. Another space comedy that focuses on the fantasy element would be Apollo 10 and a Half: A Space Age Childhood. It looks back at the 1969 moon landing in insane detail, but it also is juxtaposed by this kid who kind of remembers it being as him being chosen to go to space because NASA accidentally made a craft that was too small. It comes from Richard Linklater. It's already on Netflix, and they went as far as timing every single TV shot that you see in this movie to the exact same thing that was being broadcast at that time.
We need a kid like you to test this accidentally smaller version on the lunar surface, and soon.
Stan, you're our only hope.
I Love My Dad is peak cringe comedy. It's inspired by writer, director, and star James Morosini's true story about being catfished by his father. There are bits that had me wincing. There's text messages that I think were done in a very engaging way on screen, and it's a story that actually by the end of it was more heartfelt than I expected it to be.
I wanted it to be as hyper personal as it possibly could be, to the point where it almost felt like too personal. Like I wanted to almost have too much skin in the game, because it adds this level of extra cringe, I think. The
unbearable weight of massive talent is the action comedy that parodies Nick Cage, with Nick Cage doing Nick Cage things. I think the more that you know about his movies, the more you're going to love this one. And it's definitely one, like a lot of Nick Cage movies, that you have to see with an audience. But I really wish they kept the deleted scenes that they pitched to Cage, because that was the reason he signed on. And I think without them, without having the somber Cage, you can't really take advantage of unhinged Cage.
You go! I'll never forget you, Habs!
At number 2 would be Bodies, 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 the paranoid comedy slasher that is pretty much A24's Among Us. It has a stacked cast as it puts a group of rich kids in a mansion during a storm as their game of Mafia gets a little too real. And if you haven't heard about Rachel Sennett yet, do yourself a favor and go watch Shiva Baby. Of course, at the very top of my comedy list would be Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. That's really everything and everywhere. The story of a woman struggling to pay her taxes, only to end up facing alternate dimensions in order to maintain the multiverse. It's a cast that's completely sick. Andy Lee, who is, in my opinion, the new Eco, and I just love how the Daniels refused to do what they refer to as Marvel coverage and had no second unit. Every single frame in this movie is theirs. And I was just really excited to see this open up to people since we were able to be at the premiere. And now it's the #1 movie of all time.
I'm not your husband. I'm another version of him from another universe. I'm here because we need your help.
Very busy today. No time to help you.
Now, go catch Swiss Army Man if you haven't. Like I said, South by also has a big music festival happening simultaneously, and along that came a lot of music profiles on film. Sheryl Crow had a doc that was way too short, especially considering that it's going to be on Showtime, so I don't see how it's not a miniseries when you're dealing with streaming, because I did appreciate how honest she was in it, but I hate the fact that you're like 1 minute going from her story about touring with Michael Jackson, and then like in the next minute she's dealing with a good fella. Like, give it some time. Dio, Dreamers Never Die, got into the history of Black Sabbath. I Get Knocked Down showcased what the band Chumbawamba has been up to, and This Much I Know to Be True was a Nick Cave doc that I wasn't expecting to be a recording session, so I kind of need to rewatch this one with better speakers because streaming does not do it justice. Really Good Rejects got into the history of guitars and how they're made with, a bunch of little anecdotes from different musicians and how connected they are to their instruments, but I would highly recommend the director Alex Gu's previous South by film, Donut King, because that was one that I really liked from that year. Jazz Fest, A New Orleans Story, is a look back at this massive annual festival, starting from its beginnings to even the present, how it survived COVID. It got picked up by Sony Pictures Classic, which is probably the best cosign you can get for a doc, but I personally would have just loved to have seen 100% less Katy Perry on this. 32 Sounds pitched itself as an immersive experience that begins by telling you to put on headphones if you're streaming it, but then it turns out that they're also going to be touring it with a live orchestra. It pretty much goes through 32 sound explorations to see how you perceive it. They get into Foley, spatial, room tone. It talks about the deaf community's relation to sound and how you can even capture audio to preserve the dead. And they even play 433 in its entirety. A couple of docs that connected artists to their roots would be The Drums in Santo's Skin to Skin, that showcased the lineage of this culture through their instruments and the sound that's been carried on. There was also Omayari, a song film by violinist Kishibashi, who is actually visiting all the Japanese entrapment camps from World War II. that are here in the U.S. It gets into the history of these people who had to leave everything behind that resembled their culture, which is insane, but he then relates it to what it means to be an American today, like what exactly defines that. He's then able to incorporate all of that into his music, since he's someone who never really looked back at his roots, but realizes that it's never too late, since he still has a daughter he can pass it down to.
When we learn to look through the eyes of a stranger, our hearts can grow deeper.
There was one that I didn't get to catch. It was called Cypher. It was supposed to be this Tierra Whack doc that honestly just disappeared off the schedule, so I don't know if anyone knows anything about this, but I'm keeping my eyes out peeled for this. But in terms of my top 4 recommendations for the music docs, I have to begin with Anonymous Club. I personally wasn't up to date with Courtney Barnett's music, even though Zach is always quoting her, but I was quick to ask him for a playlist as soon as this was done. It's a very, honestly too intimate doc that follows this introverted artist as she realizes the responsibilities and sacrifices of her music that I think was presented excellently.
Looking forward to the next day. You know, I have hope for the next day to fix whatever was wrong the day before.
Getting it back, the story of Samande goes through the history of this group of musicians, their influence on sampling, and how music, even if it doesn't have a strong debut, it never expires. Eventually the cycle will come around and it's going to find new ears. And now I get to play them at a party and be the cool person.
These guys are everywhere. Once you're introduced to it, that relationship's with you for life.
In the Court of Crimson King covers the band that's doesn't even consider themselves a band, but a creative environment that questions if it's worth dedicating and sacrificing everything for one moment of transcendence for a live audience. And I guess there's a reason Ye sampled them.
This is the first King Crimson where there's not at least one member in the band that actively resents my presence, which is astonishing.
My top music doc, though, would be Look at Me, the doc on Xxxtentacion, that not only looks back at his short life, but pits the question of the art versus the artist, and how honestly one informs the other. I don't think it's one that's going to change anyone's mind who's already set on the man.
There's definitely a difference between Jose Onfroy and Xxxtentacion.
But it is one that breaks down generational trauma, which director Saba Falayan put together perfectly, in my opinion, thanks to her mental health background, and honestly ended up reaching people I wasn't expecting it to.
I came to this movie not open. I didn't even know I walked in. So I want to thank you, because you humanized, like nobody's perfect. You really humanized me.
Now, I want to take a little bit to talk about all of the VR and AR, pretty much what they're collectively calling XR now, because I've always been a big fan of that, and I really do think it's the future of storytelling. But alongside with that, this year, they had a big push for NFTs. Like, Dolly had a couple of movies that included her at the fest, yet the biggest thing that she was pushing was her Dollyverse NFTs.
Show business is a money-making joke, and I've just always liked telling jokes.
I can see the potential. I'm never one to dismiss something early, but I also gotta be honest, I'm still a little skeptical. It's weird hearing NFTs being pitched as freedom from the big corporate overlords when they're the big names that are holding the keynotes on it. For all the talk of it being about equality, you can't enter places unless you have said token. All the talk about accessibility, you have to RSVP in person for some of these talks because Lord forbid they're streamed to the people. And they just say a lot of buzzwords, They market it as a way to express your fandom. They use words like in perpetuity, scarcity. It's really all corp talk. I would actually recommend some other South by docs that aren't just fantastic on their own, but kind of look at similar concepts, like it's just in a different industry. Diamond Hands, The Legend of Wall Street Bets, looks at the GameStop debacle that I think opened up a lot of people's eyes to see how rigged the game is and always has been. And I would also recommend Nothing Lasts Forever, that exposes the diamond industry.
People want diamonds because they've been told to, and none of them are really worth anything. And surprise, your big diamond might be fake too.
To me, all this is very similar thinking. It's a similar approach. It's just being moved to digital. But there was a lot of keynotes that I checked out in terms of movies. Again, I love VR and XR, and I really do think that's the next form of storytelling. And I see a lot of Oscar winners already making the leap. But I didn't know that they're funding movies through blockchain. Francis Ford Coppola's kid had a whole panel about his company that he's pitching as a reverse Kickstarter where they pay people to see if they like a movie. It's supposed to be like a digital marketplace where users get rewarded on what movies they can guess will accurately win awards or be successful. I don't know too much on it, but they ended up name dropping the boy Soderbergh, who even made a donation. So, we'll wait and see. To me, it's just creating digital landlords for digital properties. Like, I just always think it's dumb to geoblock what's considered the World Wide Web, In my opinion, it kind of just feels like it's going to end up being the ultimate copyright system that they're really just working towards. Because already a lot of movies feel like they're just a compilation of clips to see what gets memed. So it's really just a matter of time before the GIFs that you used are NFT'd, so these companies can make money in every way, and you end up getting copyrights just for having a still on your phone. Best example would be the Mickey doc that they had, The Story of the Mouse, which is honestly an in-depth look at the mouse and the icon that it is, obviously because it's coming from the company, but it's also one that gets nasty and just glosses over it. Like, they admit Mickey almost shut down a daycare because they were just using their logo, how Mickey is so iconic that it advertised weapons of war back in the day, that, yeah, there was a time Mickey did blackface, but then they're like, yeah, did you see Epcot's got new flavors though? I just don't like big corporations still being the ones controlling what's supposed to be the new age for digital. But if I was going to go all in, if I was just going to join the team, there was one person, one man who can convince me, and that'd be the meta dude himself. And he was going to do an in-person presentation where he was going to discuss the new digital...
I feel a bit weird to be the only one who's not there in person today, but I know a lot of the technology and everything that we're building is about being able to feel present with people no matter where you are, so I feel like that kind of fits.
Bruh. Really quick, I want to highlight some of our favorite shorts from the fest, starting off with the docs. There was The Trails Before Us, that follows a group of kids who transform their grandparents' land in order to host a bike race. Nalujuk Night, which is a horror doc about an Inuit tradition where creatures walk to town annually and scare people. They hit them if they misbehave. Honestly, it's like real life The Village, and I think this would pair very well with another short called Nightbreakers. Backstage is a satisfying behind-the-scenes look at the craftspeople who put together the National Opera in Warsaw. Memory Builds a Monument looks back at a Houston music venue and showcases how a monument is just an object where ideas can be attached to. Folk Frontera is another music-centric short that spins the idea of what American Latin music was and what it is today. Big Water Summer, a creation story, sees the company of coffee pot farms trying to help their community by giving them fresh produce, and also kind of leaves you on a cliffhanger because I need to know if they got that well. The Sentence of Michael Thompson details the arrest and charges of Michigan's longest-serving nonviolent offender and the mismanaging of his case, and it's also being produced by Cresco. On the opposite side is Dress a Cow, which looks at this Ohio town's tradition of dressing up a cow and holding a competition where there can be 3 first places in 2 seconds. It's been running for decades, and even as a short, it was the better cow movie of the fest. My Dudas, I know, may not be in anyone else's top 10, but it was a really simple movie that got me. It follows a Polish mother whose kid has moved away and decides to adopt a squirrel who she actually builds a relationship with. And finally, Video Visit, which looks at the Brooklyn Public Library and the librarians who help family members contact their loved ones who are imprisoned. And while it could have gone deeper, it definitely has its flaws. It's insane to see how the state takes advantage of people by nickel and diming them. On the short narrative side of things, there was Steakhouse, an animated short that takes overcooked emotions a slice too far. The Shaman's Apprentice, which is a stop-motion short about a girl who has to step up and go underground in order to get an answer that her people need. Glitter Ain't Gold, which is about a middle schooler going through his rite of passage of buying his first gold chain. That, of course, is fake. Too Rough is a really good drama about Nick and his dysfunctional home life that comes to a clash when his boyfriend forgets to leave the next morning. Everything Will Be Alright is a short drama about a teacher who's been keeping a secret from her family and has to face it right as the pandemic is hitting. Moshari is a creepy horror/drama about 2 sisters facing mosquitoes, but also themselves. Tennis Ball on His Day Off is about a tennis ball on his day off who becomes aware of its uselessness and has a credit in there that I was not expecting, so shout out my boy. The Scene's Tears is an incredibly animated stop-motion short about Algerian workers who stood up to their curfew that they were given back in the 60s. Local Middle Schooler is about a girl who has magical eyelashes that everyone wants to take a piece of, all the while she just wants clear skin. And finally is Censor of Dreams, the fantasy, horror, mystery drama of a short that follows a team of censors responsible for shaping the memories of Yoko and making sure things don't get turned inside out. The final category I want to wrap is all of the best docs and dramas from the fest that I was able to catch. Under the Influence was probably one of the most anticipated ones since it covers David Dobrik and it's directed by Casey Neistat, who, that boy's got skills with editing. It's a very well put together doc about a person who never has to worry about appearing that way, because you know it's bad when the whole point of the doc is to look at the past drama that he's gone through, and the response is, damn, I can't keep up with all my sponsorships. There was also a trio of sports stocks. The legend Nolan Ryan had his own called Facing Nolan. That is more by the numbers than his stats, since he is the executive producer on it, but it's a decent little recap of his 27-year career and his 51 records, which, yeah, even includes most walks and wild pitches. There was The Parallel of Skate Dreams, which covers women's skateboarding and all of the gatekeepers and obstacles they've had to face until cell phones and YouTube helped them actually get out there, because you know it's bad when their role model is a cartoon. I love Reggie, but, come on. It's a big contrast compared to Tony Hawk until the wheels fall off, who has spent like half of his doc reminding you that his daddy didn't secure him his early trophies. But, I love Tony Hawk. And besides that, it is a decent look at his perseverance and his passion. You could even call it an obsession with how he sees the sport and really the philosophy behind why he skates.
I was obsessed and I became a machine. That was the beginning of his launch to become Tony Hawk.
There was a duo of faith-based movies with Raquel 1-1, where she questions her religion and decides that she's going to write her own book, with the first verse being Raquel 1-1. And Crows Are White, which was pitched as a comedy doc about a filmmaker who's produced some really good movies, and this is his debut as he struggles with his own faith and his own family and decides to go to a monastery to see if he can find answers. And they just either don't talk to him or laugh at him. Some of the best hometown docs would be Bad Axe, that follows a filmmaker filming his own family's struggle to keep their restaurant open, especially in the midst of the pandemic. And it showcases politics in a way where it just proves that people are quick to use that word and call somebody else for their politics when they just disagree with them, but then they don't see themselves as being political. It's just them living their truths. What We Leave Behind, I know isn't going to be for everyone. It's a very patient and sometimes specific doc, but it follows a filmmaker documenting a grandpa now that he's back home in Mexico and he's too old to travel. And it really took me back to Durango. Like, I thought it was a great time capsule as a grandpa's building a house that he intends to leave behind, and it's one that I'm hoping to revisit. X also premiered there, and this is one that I want to make a full LME for as part of a horror October marathon that I'm planning for, but I may also need to make a fashion LME because Cudi was out there with those boots.
Yo, I just want to say Ty West is the god. Make some noise.
But now for my top 6 recommendations between the dramas and the docs, I have Spaz, a documentary about Steve Spaz Williams, who really pushed computer animation in some of the most iconic movies that we've had. It gets into his personal life and his own troubles, but also his fights against the studio heads that always wanted to take credit. It gets into all the politics that goes behind movie making and how he even predicted tech that we're barely seeing today. It's one that I highly recommend, and it'll have you looking at those supervisors who accept awards very different.
Jurassic Park storyboards. This was the first shot, JC4. 75 frames, took me 4 months to animate this shot.
The Art of Making It focuses on the art world and talks about who gets seen, who gets left behind, and why. I think it is a fascinating doc that, regardless of if you have an interest in art, I think what they talk about can be focused on any other industry. The young artists that they look at really break down certain ways that they see art, how something can be abstract just because it doesn't follow the patterns already set, or if an institution just felt threatened and didn't like them. And anytime this man was on screen, he was speaking nothing but facts.
We talk in code. We dress a certain way. We're very identifiable to one another, but we are not an open field.
Gabby Gifford's Won't Back Down was the one that got me close to tears. It comes from directors Julie Cohen and Betsy West, who I think always deliver really good documentaries, and here they follow Gabby Gifford's journey after a major incident and her approach through it all, which was honestly really impacting.
Not everybody's story is going to make an amazing documentary, so we actually spent a lot of our time is spent thinking whose story is kind of rich enough and with enough elements to it to make an incredible documentary. Usually we really wring our hands over this decision. With Gabby, after the initial Zoom call that we had with her in April of 2020, we were literally texting each other during the call yes, okay, we want to do this. We are in.
The blind man who did not want to see Titanic follows a big film fan who's name-dropping references left and right, except for the one movie he never got to watch before he started losing his vision. The fest had several great movies dealing with disabilities, and I know that many times festivals kind of feel the need to tout a checkbox if it stars specific actors, but this is an incredible movie in its own right, because once he leaves the house to go on a blind date, it became a really solid thriller.
Mulla on suunnitelma. Mä tuun sun luo.
Oot sä tosissaan?
Mä en oo koskaan ollut näin tosissaan.
Nika had the best performance from the fest by Elisaveta Yankovskaya and rightfully earned that award. It covers the true story of Nika Turbina, who was a famous poet in Soviet Russia, and the aftermath of that fame when she hits her 20s, all of the flashes to her past that are haunting her, and that struggle for her to finally make her own decisions for her future. I thought it was a really good drama, and I can't wait to rewatch this one.
There are these guns you may or may have not seen, and these are called Zepp guns. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so...
Backwards so that I wouldn't get in trouble with Pez Corporation.
Makes a lot of sense.
Everybody does. So I just flipped it and ran.
Finally, at the top of the list is the Pez Outlaw. I thought this had to do with the guy who ran the Pez dispenser company, who, no lie, they call him the Pesident. It's actually about the guy who duped the Pesident. It tells the story of the dude who took collecting to such an extreme that he claims he's the reason cereal boxes say one per household. It's told through these fascinating reenactments and interviews, and homie even has an up-to-date blog that goes into even crazier detail about all the stuff that he smuggled overseas. But besides being an insane story told extremely well, at the heart of it, it's also a romance movie. Since, as he puts it, you don't create a product, you create a story. And I can't wait for people to catch this one. Thank you guys for checking out this video, and I'm curious to know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Let me know what movies you're interested from this festival, or even any other festivals, anything that's on the horizon that you're looking forward to, what you want to see full LMEs on. I still have my own watch list that I want to see from this place, and even some I want to rewatch, because there was one that was shot in one take, but I kind of hated it, so I want to give it another watch. Maybe it'll jive with me better, but just in case, here's the top 10 of all the movies that I would highly recommend from the festival, all the stuff combined. Like I said, I also have the Intercut podcast where we went through every single movie in more detail, and over there on the podcast, we tend to cover all of the stuff immediately after the festival, and then, a lot of posters and stuff, we kind of wait for them to release. Sometimes they don't, but hopefully I was able to put some new must-watches, or what may be a new must-watch, on your radar. Let me know about any other movies that you're interested in, and until next time, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll send you some brisket.